All right, folks. Good day. Welcome to this special session of the Transhumanist Africa Artificial Intelligence Short Film Festival. Today, we are honored and truly honored to be joined by one of the most inspiring voices in African cinema. Our guest is not only an award winning filmmaker, but a visionary storyteller whose work has redefined the way African narratives are told on screen. From Light in the Dark to One Lego's Night and Sylvia, his films are more than just entertainment. They are bold, emotionally resonant journeys that reflect the complexity and beauty of African life. He's a two-time AMVCA winner, a Netflix featured director, and a tireless mentor of the next generation of filmmakers through his imagery program. Whether behind the camera or in the classroom, his passion for storytelling is matched only by his generosity in sharing it. Please join me in welcoming an artist, an educator, and a true creative force, Mr. Ekene Mekwunye.
Hi, hi. Thank you very much for your generous introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Okay, so let me have the first slide. So today we'll be talking about story development in film. And um, I'm very pumped up talking about this. I have just about, I think, 30 minutes to 40 minutes to talk about this before we go into our Q&A. So I'm talking about story development in film. There are different aspects. There are different aspects of filmmaking, but the process of telling the story for me is the most important aspect. Um, and my first slide, I'm saying the process of planning, structuring, and evolving a narrative for film forms the backbone of any successful movie. The most important aspect of film is the part where you are putting the story together. Because every other person that's going to be working on the film, both the director, the DOP, the costume designer, the hair and makeup, production design, everybody are going to be working according to what you've pieced together in the story. So if everybody is going to be working according to this, then this has got to be the most important aspect. And I keep telling people that if there's any place where you need to spend time, is in the development of the story. Because once you have your story, every other thing keys through. So this is a very, very vital part, and that's why how you plan it, how you structure it, is very, very important. Very, very important to um, what your final output is going to be. So my next slide, please. So let's start with the key elements of a strong story. What are the key elements of a strong story? Um, the first thing you have to look at your premise. What's your story about? What's the core idea behind the story? A lot of times people just want to tell a story, but they've not taken time to ask themselves this question. Okay, what's my story? Hammond's circle. Your character is going through an arc. You know. Take it, return, and the character is changed. So your character is going through this arc, and you have to be clear about it. You have to also look at conflicts. Conflicts are what drives the story. Conflicts can be external, when your character is facing external forces, but the conflicts can also be what's going on inside your character. So conflicts are very, very important, and how these conflicts are defined, also defines the way your story is going to go. Your character is going through. What is a story without conflicts? It's like playing a video game where there are no obstacles. It's going to be very boring. These conflicts are carefully created, to cause, um, um, these conflicts are carefully created to make sure that these stories are engaging. It's what builds the story. Conflicts are a very, very integral part to storytelling. Conflicts is what makes your audience to be interested. It's like, have you ever found yourself flipping through a channel and you see this guy just walking down the road? And what's interesting about the guy? But the guy's walking down the road, and all of a sudden you see that he falls into a ditch. That is what gets you interested. You're like, okay, is he going to come out of this? Something like that. So all these conflicts that your character has to go through, those are the things that gets your audience interested. If you're just watching and the guy is just walking down the road and nothing is happening, you'll change the channel because there's nothing that is happening. Then you now have to look at what is the theme. You have to be clear as to what the theme of your story is. And I'll give you an example. So when you think of Lion King, it's about identity, responsibility, circle of life. You have to be clear as to what is the theme of this story. For a story to be strong, its theme has to be very clear. You look at Titanic. What's the theme of Titanic? Love, social class. When you look at Titanic, you are very clear. In fact, even the way the ship is structured, it's dividing people into different classes. It was carefully created. It's about fate. How one can, without knowing what's going to happen to you the next second. It's about sacrifice. The sacrifice that one has to make. Even if it's going to take him his life. When you look at The Godfather, what's the thing behind The Godfather? It's about family. It's about power. It's about family loyalty. It's about corruption. So when we watch your film, we should be clear as to what the theme of your film is about. You can't waver about it. It has to be very, very clear. The next slide, please. So let's look at the triad structure. We can't talk about story structure without talking about the triad structure. Very, very important. Please go ahead. Back to triad structure. Yes, thank you. The triad structure. So, in the triad structure. Okay, yes, thank you. You can leave it there. So the triad structure is how a story is divided into structures. We could spend the rest of our time just talking about this, but this is a guideline, to help us understand how stories are structured. So we have the first act, the second act, and the third act. The first act is about the setup. The way your story, you have to, these things have to be clear when you're writing your story. Very, very important as to how, your story is structured. So the first act talks about the introduction of the characters. This is where you introduce your characters. This is where we get to meet your characters. This is where we get to know them. This is where we get to understand who they are, what their world is about, and this is where we now start to understand the conflicts that is ahead of them. Okay, so this is where we now understand the conflicts that they are going to be facing. This is where we have the inciting incident, where the inciting incident is what? Okay, so this inciting incident is that course a story takes that really starts the journey of this person's life. So, like we're talking about a guy just walking down the street. You know, he wakes up, have his bath, he gets dressed, he's walking down the road. That's his normal story. But let's say he falls into a ditch. Now, that is where the story takes a turn. And that's the inciting incident. The inciting incident is that thing, you know, that makes the story takes a different course from his normal course. His normal course is that he's walking down the road, he gets to work, he starts to work, and the like. That is his normal routine. But in every story, you see that something happens in the beginning of the film. Usually takes place within the first, between the first 10 to 20 minutes of the film. Some films between the first 15 to 25 minutes of the film, but it usually takes place in the beginning of the film. So we start with the setup. You know, we're looking at the introduction of the characters. We look at the world they're in. We understand what they do for a living. We understand, you know, them. We understand what's going on in their mind. Then this happens. You know, give me a second. I want to take it step by step so that we understand. Just give me a second. Something I want to look at. I should have set this up earlier. Okay. Okay. Yes, found it. So we're looking at. So we have the inciting incident. You know, so all this in the act one. Sometimes your character have to have a second thought by the time he's now starting this journey, because it's like when you look at I'm trying to remember this Mel Gibson movie. Can't remember the title now. Okay, let me not use that. But you know, when the hero's journey starts and his story takes it, sometimes he's asking himself, do I really want to do this? Or so that's what the second thought is about that you find there. Or maybe I should just wait this out. So sometimes he faces a second thought, but by the time he's made up his mind, I'm really going through this, he knows that there's no coming back. You know, so there we have, you know, we have the end of the first act. Then we now go into the second act. When you go into the second act, there we have the character facing different obstacles. You know, there we have the first obstacle the character faces another obstacle. Then we get to the midpoint in the film. You know, the character is facing different obstacles at this point. You know, the character at this point, you know what the character is trying to achieve. You know, in the second act, by the end of the first act, we already know, okay, this is what the character is going for. This is what is in the character's mind. This is what the character is trying to achieve. At this point, you now see the antagonist, because the antagonist is the person that is standing between the character achieving what he wants to achieve, you know, and the antagonist is the person standing between the character and him achieving what he wants to achieve, or her achieving what she wants to achieve. So the character is going through an act at this point. It looks as though he's trying to get it, but something happens. Then he goes this way. It looks as though he's trying to get it. This happens. So the character is facing different obstacles at this time. You know, then we get to the midpoint, and it goes and goes until we get to the climax. You know, and I keep saying that there's a reason why it's called the climax. It's called the climax for a reason. You know, because you can imagine, and the climax for me is in your storytelling is one of the most important aspects of your storytelling. It's one of the most important points of your storytelling, because that's where the second act ends. But why is it the most important part, one of the most important parts of your storytelling? It's because this is what your audience has been looking for. Because your audience is going through him. So it's like the guy meets a girl and want to find out through the film, is he going to get the girl? This is the point where he either gets the girl or never gets the girl. So why is it that your audience, they are watching this film? They are watching this film because they want to find out if he's going to get the girl or not. So if the film is going to be about if he's going to save his child, or if he's going to face his child, just like Man on Fire, Denzel Washington's Man on Fire. watch the film and you're trying to find out, is he going to rescue this girl or not? So everything about the film is he going to rescue this girl or not? And this is the point where we find out if he's going to rescue this girl or if he's not going to rescue this girl. So imagine that your audience, this is the main reason why they are watching this film. So you have to build it carefully build it. For me, this is the moment in the film is the moment where they have this release inside of them, like, finally. So, and if you don't build it, if you don't give them that moment, it feels like they've gone through this whole journey and there's nothing special about the story. And like I said, it's called climax for a reason. How do you go through this whole act and not climax? It's like, so what have I been doing this all along? So it's very, very important. In fact, if there's one thing that you're going to need to spend, because this is for your audience. And when we make films, the major thing that we're selling is emotion. If people watch your film and they don't feel anything, then you have failed. They have to feel something. It can be anger, it can be joy, it can be laughter, it can be fear, it can be despair, whatever it is. These feelings that this audience feel, this is where it's crafted. It's in your storytelling. So you have to be very intentional about it. How you build your rising tension, how you set up the obstacles, get into your midpoints, then how you now get to the climax. It's very, very important. How do you build this? And this is what, in fact, your whole writing is about. This is what story development is about. How do I get to this climax? What do I need out? What do I look out for in building this? And how do I build my climax? I've seen films where, the film just gets to the end and you're asking yourself, like, okay, I mean, I feel like mentioning one, but there's no need mentioning any film. And you're asking yourself, so what did I spend this whole time doing? And you don't want your audience to feel this way. So this point is very, very important. How do I build for my client? So that's why story development is not something you rush. It's not something, I just have 1 week. You take your time. If it's going to take you 1 year, take that 1 year. Because once the film is out, it takes a life of its own. You can't change it anymore. I found myself in situations where I'm very eager to tell the story. I really want to tell this story. And let me tell you one terrible thing about it is the fact that by the time you're rushing, then you get to the point where you just do this and the film is made and the film is out and you're watching it and you're like, I wish I changed that part. But at that point, there's nothing you can do. And this is what you're going to be remembered by. So take your time to build the story. Take your time to create the story, to build what your, exciting incident is going to be, to build up what the obstacles that your main character is going to go through. And you need to think about, make sure it's palpable. Make sure it's something that would make your audience wanting for more. It has to be, so what happens next? So what happens next? Make your audience keep asking that question. So what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And in building your climax, it's not necessarily giving them what they're expecting. Yeah, it could be, is he going to get the girl? I remember, I love La La Land, because at the end of the day, he doesn't get the girl. But the beautiful thing about La La Land is they both achieve their dreams. I'm sorry for the spoilers here, but it's not the way they think of it. It's not the for forever after, and we'll be together for the rest of our lives. But both of them achieve their dream. So I like it when you build the audience to expect this, and you get to your climax and it's something else entirely. It's what I call the what the fuck moment. it's what I live as a filmmaker. So how you build up to your climax is very, very, very important. Then the resolution. So yes, we've gotten to the climax, but how do you end the film? I was talking with someone yesterday and she was telling me about my film, which I wrote the story, titled Light in the Dark. That was my directorial debut, by the way. And how she was so, in fact, she spent almost half of the time when we were talking about how the film ended. So how your film ends. Now you've gotten to your climax, but how do you end the film? When you look at great films, I remember Casablanca, when he says, Louis, um, oh gosh, I hate when this happens to me. It seems like yes, Louis, this could be the beginning of a beautiful vision. You look for lines that will be memorable. When you are writing a vision, this because this is the end of the film now. Give them something to remember. Give them something that something that would keep them thinking about the film. So you hit your climax. How you end the film now is now very important. How do you wrap it up? How do you ease them after this big boozer you've given them, after this big shocker you've given them? How do you ease them off then to end the film? So very, very important. So this is what the three act structure is about. It's how you divide it into three: the setup, the confrontations, then the resolution. And interesting thing is, not just the story has the beginning, the middle, and the end, which is the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Every scene also has this. Every scene in your film, every scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you in telling your story, you also have to look at your scenes, scene by scene, and we'll get to that part later. You have to look at not just the track structure for your story, look at it for your scene as well. Next slide, please. So let's look at character development. This is very, very important because a lot of times this is where stories fall, how these characters are developed. You have to take your time to develop your characters. People have to be able to empathize with your character. People have to be able to feel your character. So how you develop your characters are very, very important, especially your protagonist, but also your antagonist, because your antagonist could also be someone that people would relate with very much. So you have to look at your characters. Your characters don't have to be perfect people; they have to be flawed people, because otherwise, people won't be able to relate with them. People a lot of times find themselves in your characters. So how you develop your characters, very, 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 very important. What are their goals? Every character has a goal. So your protagonist, what is the goal of your protagonist? What are their flaws? Their flaws are those things that sometimes hinder them from even achieving these goals. So how you develop your protagonist is very, very important. And the kind of conflicts that they are going to face. Now, your protagonist has to face a transformation, which is what we're talking about, the character arc. So your protagonist starts as this character looking to, this is what their goal is in life. Then this thing happens to them. Now they have to find out about something. They have to go look for something. They have to try to achieve something. They face different obstacles. These obstacles makes them discover something about themselves, and they are transformed. So your character should not be flat. They shouldn't be as they are from the beginning. If your character knew only 20% in the beginning, at the end, they should have known 90% about something. They should transform. They shouldn't be flat. They shouldn't be exactly the way they start. So how you develop your character, your protagonist is very, very important. And don't forget, the main person that your audience are rooting for is your protagonist. So how you develop that protagonist is very, very important. They have to be able to connect with certain aspects of their lives with this protagonist. And that's the reason why your audience follow your protagonist. There's something they see in your protagonist. There's something they can relate with. Your protagonist doesn't have to be perfect. Your protagonist has to be just this regular person that becomes this extraordinary person. And when you look at virtually all your characters, from Superman, superheroes, to even like the Godfather. He was just a simple guy who wanted to live a simple life. He didn't want to live the life of his family, but his father dies. He has to take over the business. He has to deal with people, the kinds of people who he wasn't dealing with before. His life changes entirely. So when you look at Al Pacino, the beginning of The Godfather, and you look at him at the end, he's completely different. Even his wife can't recognize him at this point again. His life has changed. So people have to be able to flow with your character. People have to understand their goal. It has to be very clear. We have to understand what their flaws are. We have to look at what conflicts they have to go through, and we have to look at their transformation. This same thing goes for your antagonist. Your antagonist should not be flat. Your antagonist has to be someone, who is, if there's one antagonist I love so much, is the Ice King in Game of Thrones. The guy is, for me, is one of the when you're talking about antagonists, he doesn't say a word from the beginning to the end, but his actions, his tease is 100%. You can see how powerful he is just by the little things he does. So you can see how everybody is, you can see how Jon Snow and the likes are trying so hard to achieve their goal, and the guy is just standing there looking at them. And when they're trying so hard, he just looks at one of his guys and he goes, the way he transformed that dragon. So the way you set up your antagonist is also very important, because it says a lot in the way the story is going to go. So some people spend so much time in developing their protagonists, they forget to develop the antagonist as well. And sometimes, even though your antagonist a lot of times is usually a bad person, but it's the same way girls fall in love with bad boys. Your audience have, in a way, sometimes people fall in love with the antagonist, and all this is also comes about the way you develop your antagonist. Very, very important. And even your supporting characters, and there's a reason why I put up the Titanic poster here, because when you look at Titanic, if you look at all the characters in Titanic were very unique in their own special way. From the protagonists to the antagonists to the others that played little roles. Her mother, the lady that gave him the jacket, all the characters in that story were carefully built. And the sum of all these people, brings about the entire experience that you get from watching this story. So the way you build your characters are very, very important. You have to take time in building not just your protagonist, but your antagonist and your supporting characters. They all, they're all from these chains that make up they all form these rings, pardon me, that form your chain at the end of the day. And they say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. So if you build weak characters, or you build one weak character somewhere, even if that character just has 5 minutes of screen time, that 5 minutes of dullness in your story could hamper the overall look of your story. So that is why when you're telling your story, every second, every line is important. Very, very important. You spend time in building your characters and make sure that your character goes through that character arc. We've spoken about the character arc. Very, very important that they go through that character arc where they are transformed in the course of your story. And like I said earlier, the goals have to be very clear. The flaws that they go through and the transformation that character has to go through. Very, very important. The next slide, please. So let's look at the plot versus the story here. So what is the plot and what the story? So the plot is what happens in the film, or what happens in your story. It's the it's the sequence of events. And you see, the plot is how you build it. So you have to be very careful how you plot your story. You know, is what defines the what in your story, the when and the where of a story. Because at every point we have to know what is happening, when is it happening, where is it happening. How you develop this is very, very important. It provides the skeleton of the story itself. That's what the plot is. Then your story is the entire framework of what you are telling us. The entirety of the situation presented. It's what defines who your character is and why your character is doing what he or she is doing. And how the narrative is being told. It's your story is, so when you look at your theme, the ideas and your characters, this is what your story is about. So it's very, very important that you are very clear as to what the plot in this story is, and how and what the story, exactly is in what you're trying to tell. So the story is what happens, and the plot is, the plot is what happens, the series of events, and the story is like why that thing is happening. It's an emotional journey that you have to go through. So next slide, please. So you have to be, in telling your story, you have to be very clear as to what world is your story taking place in. What world is your story taking place in? You have to be clear. Where is it taking place? Your story taking place in New York? Is it taking place in Lagos? And if it's taking place in Lagos, is it taking place in 17th century Lagos? Or is it taking place in present day Lagos? Is it taking place in pre-independence Lagos? And it could be somewhere that never does not exist, and that's why I put up Wakanda. So where is Wakanda? Wakanda is somewhere in Africa, but we know it does not exist. And the reason why they had to use a place called Wakanda and create a place that does not exist is because when you look at Africa of today, we don't have an Africa that is leading in technology globally. So they needed to tell a story about an African city that is leading the world in technology, that has technology that the world has never seen before. So they have to build a place. And we hope that at some point in Africa, we'll be able to have a country like that or countries like that. But so it could be you telling a futuristic story. So you have to be very clear as to where your world is, where it's set, because a lot of times, one of the things that affect a good story is not clearly defining where your story is set. Sometimes even where your story is set could even almost be a character. One movie I love a lot is Lady Bird. Is it Lady Bird now? Yes, Lady Bird. Um, um, the 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 what's it called? The Sorry, 1 second. I want to be very sure because yes, Lady Bird. I love that movie so much. And one of the reasons why I love Lady Bird is because where the story is situated played a very crucial part in the way the story was being told. So sometimes where your story is set could be very, very, very crucial to even in building the genre of the film. So when you look at sci-fi movies, for instance, they are very, very clear as to where the story is set because sci-fi movies cannot just happen anywhere. But I was talking about Lady Bird. It's a coming of age movie, but I love how they made now I can't even remember where it was. Is it Sacramento or San Francisco? I can't remember, somewhere like that. But how they made that town very, very pivotal in their storytelling. It reminds me of one of my favorite movie by Victor Levin titled 527, and the way they portrayed New York. So it's very, very important where your story is set. Is very, very important. So you have to be very intentional about it. I made a movie recently titled A War, and it was set in Abeokuta initially, where I told the story, because the idea of the story is a true life story that took place in Abeokuta. But because I had a lot of embellishments in the story, and I felt that the people of Abeokuta might not be very happy with me if I made Abeokuta where the story is set, and the embellishments I made it, because it might portray the people of Abeokuta as people that have those practices. So I had to create a fictional world somewhere in Western Nigeria, where the story is now set. So you have to be very, very particular about where the story is set, and that's why I put Wakanda here. So next slide, please. So let's look at screenplay structures and visual storytelling. In telling your story, you have to be very careful about the moments, because storytelling is about the moments in the film. We've already spoken about the inciting incidents and the midpoint, the climax. You have to be very intentional about these moments. A lot of times when I go to cinema a lot, but one of the things I like to do is watch out for the reaction of the crowd. And one of the things I realized is that when people enjoy a movie, sometimes it's about these little moments. I remember when I went to see Doctor Strange, and I remember, he was this doctor, very shy doctor, um, um, didn't like interacting so much. So I remember when he saved this guy, and the family members were very excited, and they hugged him, and it was very strange for him because it wasn't something that he liked doing. And I remember the way the crowd reacted. I was like, in just that little moment of how the family member hugged him. And it's about these little moments. How you craft these little moments is what, because at the end of the day, storytelling is about your audience. It's not about you or how you feel. I know a lot of people say, oh, I'll tell the story about how I feel. If your audience cannot feel the story, it's a waste of time. So you have to have your audience. They are your customers. You know how businesses will say customer is king. Your audience is king. You have to have them at the back of your mind. And in telling the story, you have to be conscious about those little moments in your storytelling. Those little moments are what sum up what your story is about. Is what sums up what their experience is going to be at the end of the day. So we call them bits. So these bits in your storytelling is very, very important. Very, very important. And how you create them. Very, very important. So you have to, I spoke about this earlier. In telling your story, you have to look at your story scene by scene, and how they tie up, and what the moment is. In fact, in every scene, you should be clear as to why is this scene in this film? Why is it important in this film? What is this scene trying to achieve? Because if the scene does not add to the story, then is as well, you could as well be yanked out. You have to ask yourself, why is this scene in this story? So you have to look at your script scene by scene and ask yourself, what is this scene trying to achieve in this story? What am I trying to achieve with this scene in this story, rather? Because you are the one telling the story. What am I trying to achieve with this scene? And there are different things that could help you tell your story. So you look at flashbacks, for instance. I have a screenwriter. I always tease him. I tell him, you can never tell a story without a flashback. He likes putting flashbacks. But flashbacks are, they help us also give us a background story. They help your audience understand, oh, this is why this thing is happening, because of this thing that happened at a certain time. Or this is why this guy behaves this way, because of this thing that happened to him. This is why this thing is this way, because this thing happened at a certain time. They are not. It's not important that you must use flashback. It's not. It's not a must. Sorry, let me put it that way. It's not a must that you must have flashback, but they are there to help you. And foreshadowing is when you show us something earlier. You show us a gun somewhere. Then later on, or we see him practicing how to. Okay, it's just like in Hunger Games. We see how dexterous she is with the bow and arrow. So we can tell at that point when it comes that no, she's not going to miss this. Is how we see a guy, how he's able to use a knife, so that when the time comes in future in the film where he's going to use it to achieve what he's trying to achieve, you can see, because we've already shown you earlier, about it. So foreshadowing is basically showing us something that is going to mean something that is going to help us understand the story better later in the film. And how you set up cliffhangers is also very important, because it's important to keep your audience by the edge. Don't just feed them everything. Give them something and keep them wanting for more. And that's what the cliffhangers are about. So how you tell your story visually is very, very important, because it's what sticks in the minds of the people. Show don't tell. I mean, I can't say that long enough. It's not about don't spoon feed your audience. Don't use dialogue to say everything. Show it in pictures. Visual storytelling is very, very important. And in writing your screenplay, it's how you craft it that's also very important. How do we show this thing and not talk about it? How do we tell she's pregnant without her saying she's pregnant? I remember we've had this conversation say in Nollywood films, we always show her vomiting. and I asked the question, okay, so how else do we show her? Because again, that a lady is pregnant does not mean that her belly has protected. She has a protected belly. When she's a month pregnant or 2 months pregnant, it's not visible. So how do you tell she's pregnant even when it's not visible? For instance, how do you tell that this guy is a narcissist? Without anybody saying it. How do you tell that this lady is how do you tell that this person is a very bad person without saying it? So show don't tell. Don't always tell us that it's 8 o'clock. Show it. Don't always tell us that she has HIV. Let's see her taking her antro what's it called again? Anyway, I'm talking about. Let's see her taking her drug, the viral drug. Let's see her. You don't have to tell us everything. How do we tell that that there are different ways to show and not tell. So that should be your assignment, and it's not everything that you should be telling us. Show it. It's also very important how you use your camera in telling the story, and that's where cinematography comes in. How the cinematography of a film is very, very, very important, and how you do your mise en scène, how you use your frame. That's one frame to tell your story, and symbolism in film is also very, very important, very, very important, So how do you use symbolism in storytelling? Like in The Godfather, for instance, oranges were used to as a metaphor for death. When you watch The Godfather, whenever you saw oranges, you could tell that he's about to die. In Schindler's List, which is one of my best my best Steven Spielberg movie. Is a monochrome movie, so it's in black and white. But there's a part in the film where we see a lady, a young girl in red dress. So what does it signify? So these things, to a large extent, um, um, the symbolism that it represents. It's very, very important. So how do you use symbols? In telling stories, because when you see in Schindler's List, the girl in the red coat signified loss of innocence. The individual in a mass tragedy. It's like the red pill and the blue pill in the Matrix. Showing choice. An awakening, an uncomfortable truth. So all these things, symbolism. You could use symbolism, in telling your story, as well. Very, very important. So it's not just, again, show don't tell. It's not everything you say. In just the use of symbols, you can use this to tell your story. Next slide, please. So from script to screen, what are the things that are very important? What are the things that you have to look out for? So it starts with writing. Then you do your script breakdown. Then we'll have our storyboarding. Then we'll go to show. This is the process the script goes through, in storytelling. And there are times that, as a writer, you have to collaborate with the director. The director meets you and you will have a conversation, as to the idea behind the story. How do you use dialogue? The use of dialogue is very, very important. We already said earlier that it's not everything that you say, but dialogue is goes a long way, in the way you tell the story. Especially in when you use subtext, for instance. How do you use subtext? It's like when the Joker tells Batman, "You complete me." What the Joker is trying to say at this point is that, you are the reason why I'm important. Without you, it's as if I don't exist. It's like when he tells Jack tells her in Titanic, "You jump, I jump." He's saying at this point, I'm tied to you. I can't leave you at this point. I'm with you. So whatever decision you make is going to affect me. How do you use dialogue? It's like in The Godfather, when he says, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse." It's a subtle way of saying, I'm going to threaten him to make sure that he takes whatever it is I'm putting on the table. So the way you use dialogue in film is very, very important. You have to be careful in your choice of words and your tenses, how you use them. So this is where scripting is very, very important. This is where how you write your dialogue to even portray your actors. Your actors shouldn't sound like, especially when you have unique characters, they shouldn't sound like everyday people. They should sound different. And when you watch movies, look at how different characters sound. There's something unique about them. I was talking with someone yesterday, and I haven't seen the movie. There's this Nigerian movie that's made had a lot of views, and there's this slang that is now written in Nigeria. They say "achalugo," and because of the way a character used it, and she was telling me, I haven't seen it, but the way I was watching this person talk about this character, and she was telling me how this character was so captivating. The way he would talk to this girl, and that this is a lady, and she felt like, that she was the one that was being spoken to this way. In fact, the way she said this, she's married, but she was saying, I felt like going back to my single days and someone toasting me again, and I haven't seen it, but she was so in love with this guy. Like, she kept talking about this guy, and this character is so important because Achalugo was trending on Nigeria Twitter space, you know, and everybody's talking about this guy. And I've known him for a while. I've seen him at different big, he has done so many big movies. But to think that it's a YouTube movie, because movies on YouTube, to think that it's a YouTube movie that would bring him out this much, and because of the way he embodied this character. But if you look at it, so one of the things I found out is that from the way people talk about him, is the way they made him sound. You know, the kind of lines that he was given, you know, the way he sounded. So you have to be very careful. You have to be very intentional on how you make your character sound and kind of dialogue you write for them, you know. And this is what dialogue does. It separates, it makes your characters unique. Everybody can't sound the same way, because this is also one mistake a lot of people make, making all your characters sound the same way. Someone that has a PhD and someone that didn't go to school are sounding the same way. Someone that spent his whole life in Ghana and someone that spent his whole life in South Africa are sounding the same way. Someone that spent his whole life in the city and someone that spent his whole life in the village are sounding the same way. They cannot sound the same way. Someone in, you know, the people in different classes of life sounding the same way, using the same tense, they cannot. So you have to be very particular as to how you develop, how you come up with your dialogue for your characters. Very important. Next slide, please. I have to wrap up very soon. So let's look at some of the common pitfalls in story development. I've spoken about this even in the course of my presentation. Weak characters. If your characters are weak, your audience can't relate with them. And if your audience can't relate with them, you have lost them. You need your audience to be engaged. And the way that your audience can be engaged is when you have strong characters. That's why I said that the way you develop your characters is very, very, very important. Your characters have to be strong, because that is what gets your audience captivated, and that's what gets them to be interested and want to know what's happening to them, what's happening next. Lack of clear conflicts and weak conflicts. If you're setting up your conflicts have to be very clear. What is the conflict? Your character is trying to achieve this goal. What is that thing that is standing between him or her and achieving that goal? It has to be very clear. It has to be very clear. And it has to be something that is very difficult to surmount. It's not something that they can easily surmount, because if they can easily surmount it, then what's the charge? Imagine the guy is walking down the road and his shoelace unties. How is that a strong conflict? He will tie it back and he'll continue his journey. But she's walking down the road and her heel breaks. Now, you know, and not only does it break, the road, her car, there is no car that can take her. She's walking down a road that she cannot get a cab. Now you see that it's something. So I'm just giving example. It doesn't have to be something weak, because if it's weak, then your characters don't. If your characters are not facing stiff conflicts, then it's not interesting. So you have to ask yourself at different times, the conflicts that I'm setting up for these characters, how strong are they? How strong are they? And are they very clear that this is what they are facing? Is it very clear that this is what they are facing? I already said it before, over-reliance on dialogue. Everything should not be dialogue. Everything that you're saying, everything that you're saying in your story should not be found in dialogue. Show, don't tell. I already said about it. I already spoke about it earlier. You know, it has to be very clear. It's not something that has to be only told with dialogue. You know, then you have plot holes. The way you plot your story, you know, when you have holes in them, it can be a problem. Then characters, underdeveloped characters. Remember I said earlier, your characters have to be very strong. You know, so in developing them, don't underdevelop them. Make sure that they're properly developed. Take your time in developing them. Unpredictable endings. I said it earlier when we we're talking about the 3-act structure. Don't give your audience the ending that they are looking for. Then it won't be interesting. If you already knew what the end was going to be, then what's it going to be? But sometimes, even though we know what the end is going to be, that is going to happen, but you can make them get there, not the way the audience is expecting. So even though we know he's going to enter the room, let's not make him always enter through the door. You can make him enter from the window. If everybody's expecting he's going to enter through the door, make him jump in from the roof. Just give you an example. But your ending should not be, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. Yeah, we knew they were going to fall in love. Make them, even if they're going to fall in love, make it different. Give them, always give your audience a wow moment. I keep saying that storytelling should be about the audience and how you are going to wow the audience. How you are going to wow them, give them a wow moment, give them a situation that they were not expecting. Wow, we didn't see that coming. So very, very important. Next slide, please. So final tips for storytelling. You have to know your audience. Everybody cannot be your audience. It's not possible. In fact, do you know that there's no product that is meant for everybody? I keep telling everybody. There is no product. Someone says, okay, what about water? Everybody drinks water. Yes. But how do you present your water? Is your water in the bottle form? Or is it in sachet? Because not everybody will drink water in sachet like we have in Nigeria. And if your water is in bottle, when it's in bottle, it's usually more expensive. There are some people that would never think of buying water in that bottle format. So, yes, water is for everyone, but you have to present it. There's a way you have to present it, and how you present it will have to determine who it is you are making it for. So the same thing with film. There's no film that is made for everybody. So you have to know who are your audience. Who are you making this film for? Are you making it for young people, or are you making it for the older people? Are you making it for Nigerians, or are you making it for Chinese? Are you making it for intelligent people? Because there are some films that take a certain level of intelligence to understand. So you have to be clear about this. Very, very clear about this. Know your audience and be clear as to who your audience is. And that is going to also determine how you are going to tell your story. So know your audience. Very important. Write what you know. That's why you have to do research. Don't tell a story about an accountant and you don't know anything about accountants. Don't tell a story about an assassin and you're not going to try and understand. I mean, even though if you don't find an assassin to interview, but know certain things about them. If you're going to write a story about an engineer, you have to understand that he has to use their lingua. The same thing, if you're going to make a story about a politician, he has to talk like a politician. So you have to write what you know about. And if you don't know, if you want to tell a story about something and you don't know about it, go and do research about it. Otherwise, you're going to tell a very flat story. You're going to tell an uninspiring story. And you're going to tell a story that is lackluster. You're going to tell a story because don't forget, there are going to be people that live in that world. So if you're going to tell a story about Nigerian, for instance, and the person does not sound Nigerian, then your story is already flat. Because there are certain lingua that we use in Nigeria. The same thing about an American, same thing about a Swedish guy. So you have to know what you are writing about. I find people telling stories about subjects they know nothing about. And that's already a major pit for you. You're already doomed for failure. So write about what you know about. And if you don't know about that thing and you want to write about it, then go and know about it. You have to write about what you know about. Very important. It's also very important to get feedback. When you write your story, don't just rely and feel like, this is the best story ever written. People have that self-deceit where they deceive themselves and believe that, this story is the best story ever. Get feedback. Get people that would give you their honest feedback. Don't get friends that are psycho fans that, oh, this is great, this is great. You know, we have friends that believe that everything will do great. Those people, those are not the kind of people you need for this. Get people that will give you their honest feedback and do not care about your emotion. It's very, very important. Very, very important. And get people that are professionals in that regards. Don't just get people that know nothing about that thing. Get people to give you their feedback. That will give their honest feedback. It's very, very important. You know, so you have to know what makes a story memorable. You know, all these things are things that make the story memorable. And so these are kind of questions that should be able to ask. You know, can a film survive, you know, weak story and strong visuals? Because some people think, okay, this is a weak story, but if I give you strong visuals, they have to go hand in hand. They have to go hand in hand because one can water the other one. You know, so very, very important. These things you have to look out for them. Very, very important. And in wrapping up, next slide. I think that's the last one.
But
Yes.
Kenny, I just wanted to ask just a quick follow up. You yourself, where do you typically draw your inspiration for your stories?
So I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. So I'm very honest with you. Most of the stories I tell, I don't decide that, oh, I'm going to tell the story. I've never sat down to say, okay, what story should I tell? It's okay, maybe I should tell this story. I have never at any point done that. These stories come to me every day. So every day something comes to me. As I walk around, as I go about my day, you know, I could meet a girl walking with a guy, holding a guy. I think about, what if I tell a story about this girl and this guy? And different things that happen in my environment. But they come and they just go. You know, I think about, oh, this friend of mine that I have that I've never met that lives in New York, you know, and he wants me to be a part of a workshop. And how do I tell a story about that? So, you know, it could be anything. But what usually happens is this. So they could be this particular story that, you know, they just come, they go, they come, they go. But there are times when these particular ones just come and they never leave. And I know that I cannot do anything until I develop that story. It holds me. You know, I remember there was a time I was doing my MBA. When I started my MBA, I had an exam, and this story would not leave me until I wrote it down. I'm like, okay, now I need to prepare for my exams. Can you leave me now? You know, so sometimes these stories grip me, and that's how I know that I have to tell this story. So it's, for me, it's never that, oh, okay, maybe should I tell a story about this Nigerian guy? No, it's just how stories come to my head every day, but there are some that stay and would never go, and that's how I know, okay, these are the ones I'm to tell, because at this point I know that until I tell this story, I'm not going to be free. I just know it.
Right. Lastly, I think this is probably relevant for a lot of audience that are here now and who will see it as we go forward in this film competition. Is this a concern or not? But how do you balance telling, say, an authentic Nigerian story while making it appealing to a global audience?
Okay, so, you know, if there's a film industry, and I mean, this is my own opinion, if there's a film industry that has transversed, you know, that has gone, you know, that is seen everywhere in the world, it's Hollywood. Yeah. So, but let's look at Hollywood. I don't think that, critically look at it, I don't think that Hollywood movies, when they are making these movies, that they think about Nigerians, that they have Nigerians, or they think about Africans, think about Hollywood. They are telling their story largely to the American public. It's the same thing about the news media. When you watch CNN, for instance, you can tell that CNN, they are talking to Americans. Even though, yes, it's a global news station, but they are mainly talking to Americans. It's the same way BBC is mainly talking to British. But I know this for because I watch these news channels almost every day. So I feel like a good story in America will be a good story in Nigeria, will be a good story in Wales. And that's why workshops like this are very important. It's how you develop your story, right? Now, because if you look at it, okay, let's look at Black Panther, for instance. You know, Black Panther is supposed to be about an American, an African country somewhere, you know. But when you put these things that we've discussed today into play, and it helps you develop this story in such a way that once you can hit the major milestones in telling a good story, I think it will travel. I know people have asked things like, okay, how do we tell stories that travel? I think if you spend time developing your story and spend time asking yourself how good this story is, so and sometimes you also can't run away from the cultural aspects of these things, because there are people that would naturally not want to see a story because it's talking about Africa, for instance. You know, and there's nothing you can do about it, no matter how great you want to tell that story. You have to look at our personal biases as well. But I believe strongly that a great story would cut through barriers and cut through distance, because a good story is would always be a good story, whether it's in Brazil or it's in the United States or it's in Europe, wherever it is. So I'm more concerned about telling a good story and telling a good story that audience can resonate with. Yes, it's not every story that everyone across the world can resonate with, but why is it that American stories, when Americans tell their stories, people in virtually every part of the world can resonate with? Although that's also because of how America is leading the world in terms of um, um, in terms of um, media, in terms of um, media. Because if you look at it, everyone, because of, especially when you look at this news media, everyone knows what's happening in the United States. And because everyone would always get stories about what's happening in the United States, when you tell stories about that place, they can easily connect. They can connect with it. Um, Unlike Nigeria, where how many people around the world know what's happening in Nigeria. So if you tell the story about what's happening in Nigeria, they might not be able to connect with it. But virtually every news piece has something that is happening in the United States across the world. Whenever you watch BBC or you watch CNN, and these are the major news media across the world, they always have a story of something that is happening in the United States. So you can't also run away from these things, and it might be difficult to be able to say, oh, okay, I want to tell something that will cut across in that light. But I believe that a good story will always be a good story. If you can tell stories where people can relate, so for instance, people fall in love in Nigeria, they fall in love in the United States, they fall in love in Japan. Tell a love story, people can connect with love. If you tell a story about betrayal, people are betrayed in all these places. So it's about the theme that you use in telling your story in ways people can connect with them. And once people can connect with them, I believe it's cut across.
Yeah, I think that is the probably the sweet spot is the human condition. It's universal.
Yeah.
It's universal. Um, well, we have one question from the chat asking, is there any difference in the amount of time you spend on a short film, character development, story development versus a feature film?
Okay, so you know that a short film is definitely shorter than the feature film, so it's going to take you a longer time to write a feature film. But so when you ask, of course, I don't know how you write a short film at the same time with a feature film. It's not again. So it depends on the amount of time you want to spend. But you see, the truth is, the character in a short film is just as important as the character in a feature film. So while it might take some people a year to develop a character that would take some other people 2 months to develop. So first, it depends on who is writing the story and how much the person understands in terms of story development, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to realize that a short film is shot the same way a feature film is shot. We use the same characters, we use the same lights, we use the same
Mm-hmm.
location, we use the same
Mm-hmm.
costume. We use the
Right,
same
right,
scripts. It's pretty much the same thing. The only difference is the duration, right?
right, right,
So
right.
a strong character in a short film is just as important as a strong character in a feature film.
That's right.
I mean, you won't say, oh, because it's a short film, then we shouldn't develop the character well enough. No, you should spend the same time in developing that character, because a short film is pretty much the same thing as a feature film. The only difference is the duration.
Right, that's right. You can't. You're not getting away with anything by making it a short film. Right. And we have one more question from the audience on the screen. There, it says, "Thank you for this. My question is, how does one keep track of his character development?" And he gives an example of a movie like GOT. What is that? I'm not sure what I.
That's
Game of Thrones. Okay. Had many characters, and how when you're writing your stories, is there a technique or just a sort of process you use to keep track of those characters, even in the development phase? I mean, how do you break it down? And I mean, if you're telling a story about a guy and his girl, are you developing her at the same time you're developing him?
Okay, so yes, that's a very good question. You know, there's some. Okay, first let us differentiate between a feature film that is told in 90 minutes, thereabout, and a series that that could be told in days, not just even just hours. You know,
Right.
so it's very, very important you understand that the way you develop a character in a feature film is different from the way you develop a character in a series. But even in a feature film, there are some feature films that have multi characters, like Valentine's Day, Crash. Um, we're not seeing the story, because usually in a feature film, we're seeing our story through the eyes of a character. But sometimes you have multiple characters. It's not always the case. Usually, there are rare cases, but usually we're seeing the story through the eyes of one character. Sometimes you even have two characters, you know, like in my film One Lagos Night, where it's about these two characters who were to steal, or who are burglars. But you have to first be sure who your main character. Who are we seeing the story through the person's eyes? You know, like we say in storytelling, whose story is it? You know, so that's the main person that we are developing, because we are seeing the story through this person's eyes. So if there is anybody that we're going to spend the time, most time, in developing that character, is that person who we are seeing the story. Look at virtually every movie, we are seeing it through the eyes of a certain character.
Mm-hmm.
Virtually every movie, we are seeing it through the eyes of a certain character. And that's the person. But again, like I said, you have to develop all your characters, not just one character. So it's not just like, oh, we are concentrating on our main character who is our protagonist. But it's just that is because we are spending, because don't forget, that's the person that has the most screen time. So that's why we are spending so much time on that person. Because if the movie is in 90 minutes, you are seeing this person 75 minutes to 80 minutes sometimes. So you have to spend so much time in developing that character, because that person is the person, that character is the one carrying the story. That character is carrying the story. So if that character is carrying the story, then that's the most important character. So we
Right,
have to
right.
spend a lot of time in developing that character. But that does not mean that the other characters are not important, because a lot of times this character is interacting with these other characters. And because this character is not standing alone, the way the character is interacting with these other characters is very, very important. So you
Right.
have to also develop those other characters, because if you don't develop those other characters, it would affect this other character in the way he's interacting with them. So all the characters are very important, but you have to spend more time in developing your main character.
That's right. Now we have one last question from Israel Akman. This is basically a onset. Well, I guess it's a production political question. Who has more clout in onset, the writer or the director?
Who has more clout in the production?
Right, right. Won't there be conflicts between writers and directors when it comes to what the
Oh,
directors
sorry. Okay, so listen. Thank you very much. So let me tell you this. No. There is no conflict in this. It's very clear. If you are a filmmaker, you understand that it's very, very clear. Okay, so first, let us understand this. There are three people that are involved in writing this, that are involved in telling the story. So we have the screenwriter,
Right.
we have the director, right? And we have the editor. Now, when these three people are doing their work, a lot of times these other people are not involved. But so you have to understand this as a writer. When you've written the story, pray that it gets into the hand of a good director, because it's off your hand at this point. The writer cannot come on set to tell the director, this is how I wrote it. You will be carried out of that set. In fact, you will not even come. Have you seen hefty guys carrying somebody? They'll carry you and throw you out. So, like the person that taught me filmmaking would say, the screenwriter writes the scripts, the director writes the film. So the director also has creative license to even change certain parts in your script. So the director is the one writing the film. So it's not even, there's no even ambiguity about it.
Right.
The director is the one telling the story.
That's right. Unless you got a real good lawyer, Israel.
Exactly. Except you put this in your contract and say this is exactly how it will be, and you need a good lawyer.
Right.
Otherwise, don't come and tell the director this is how it should be. You will be
right.
thrown out, you will be thrown out of that set.
Well, that is one of the good things you don't have to worry about, Israel, is that with the AI, you can be director and writer.
All right.
Kenny, this has been great, man. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule, a very productive schedule, spending time with us and giving folks some insights into how this whole process works. Appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
And folks, listen, you had a lot of time, but get in there and play around with this stuff, because what you do today with these AI tools is not going to be what the full capabilities of AI in another 3 months. So I would be in there practicing with little short things and kind of getting your sensibilities together with the AI, and because it changes rapidly and it's getting better constantly. So what you do today is not going to be the limit. It's not going to be limited by what's coming up. It will be limited in some ways, but tomorrow is going to be a different day. So get in there and practice. The deadline for submission is October 30th, first end of the month in October. The festival will kick off to the weekend of the 21st and go through the 23rd. We hope to see a lot of good visions of what a plausible projection of the Africa we want to see. Thanks a lot, folks. Have a good day.